Hi guys, there are as many as 16 blur filters in Photoshop, and they can help you to solve a variety of tasks. Let's take a look at these filters. If you go to the filter menu, you'll see that there is a blur gallery, which presents the new blur filters and the old ones too. For example, there is Gaussian blur, which we already know. Let's look at it again. Everything is very simple here. You just move the slider and select the level of blur. At the same time, your entire image is blurred evenly to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the specified parameters. But we'll not use this simplest filter now, but consider its more complex counterparts. So I click cancel and let's see the filters that are in the filter blur gallery. Let's start with the field blur. As soon as we applied this filter, our image became blurred. We can move the slider and thus change the degree of this blur. And while we have one such slider, one pin, we have a blur. Well, almost the same as in Gaussian. By the way, here on the right you can also see the slider, which we can change, move, and the blur changes. But everything changes if, for example, we put a second pin. And then we can, for example, set the degree of blur to 0 on the first one. And here blur will not happen at all. And we will increase the blur on the second pin. And look, this area is getting more blurry. We can carry these pins here. So let's do it like this. Let me put another one here. We'll also make the background a little more blurry. And we'll leave the foreground unchanged. But look, it is blurred here too. And if, for example, I wouldn't want it to be applied here, I put another pin and just remove this blur to 0. By the way, pins can be placed outside the image. For example, if I put this pin here and added blur, then the lower edge of the image is blurred. This is how we can focus on the most important parts of our image and draw attention to them. And this effect added some volume to our image. It becomes deeper. If we decide to cancel the actions we have applied, we will click this button to remove all pins. Or we can delete them individually by selecting and clicking delete. Well, for example, I click and my pin disappears. Here is such an interesting filter. Let's click OK. Let's apply our filter. That's it. By the way, it would be possible to use a smart filter here, and then we could go back to our settings. Let's look at the following filter. Let's apply a Convert for Smart Filters option. Remember that we have this option, and it allows you to work with our image in a more comfortable mode, being able to change the settings at any time. And now let's move on. Filter, Blur Gallery, and select the Iris Blur. By the way, they are all together here, and we can always swap these filters. And in the middle there is such an area that we can move. This will be the area of maximum sharpness. Outside of this area, the blur occurs. And in the same way, we can move the slider and decrease or increase the degree of this blurring, making the focus on the details that are important to us. In addition, we can move these dots here, and look, the image becomes clearer. Or if we move these dots to the center, the blur becomes smoother and smoother. But we can also move these dots separately. To do this, hold down the Alt key, and we can, for example, move this point here, and we leave the rest where we had them. We can also, for example, rotate this ellipse. In this way, we can change its size, of course. And if we use these squares, then we will have such a form. Moreover, there may be several areas where we increase the sharpness and blur everything else. For example, I can click here, put another pin and create another one of the same area here, in which our image will be sharp. And outside we will have a more blurry image. I click and make more active this area. I can increase it. For example, I can make another one here. So let's reduce the blur. So, well, you can already see what is going on. But if we blur the zone too much, then the effect of this filter is very clearly visible. We are not going to do this, we are going to do this. By the way, we can, for example, add more noise. I switch to the noise tab. And if we increase this value, then we added an image and noise. Here I have set it as much as possible, so that it can be seen. It is such an interesting effect. And you can somehow adjust the size of this noise. You can quite figure it out for yourself. So, I think I will remove this pin after all. Okay, I'll take the noise away. It seems to me that it doesn't look quite beautiful here. And probably I will increase the blur radius here, so that the effect is still more noticeable. Okay, well, we'll probably do it like this, so that we'll still have an emphasis on this dish, and everything else is more blurry. So, that's how we leave it and click. Okay, if we compare it with the original image, it looked like this, and that's what we got. It seems to me that it has become a little more artistic. The next filter we'll look at is called Tilt Shift. Let's go into it. Blur Gallery, Tilt Shift. So look, we have a zone in the center that will keep sharp. We can move it, and there are zones that will be less sharp. There are at the top and bottom, in this case. And we can change the degree of blur by moving these lines here. In addition, we can also rotate. Here, for example, I can blur it here. Let's do this. For example, let's stretch. Okay. And of course, we can adjust either the degree of blur with the slider or with the help of this round here. Well, for example, this is how we can do it. We can also add a distortion. And you see what it gives. Look at the blurred areas. So, just like that. And of course, you can also make several zones. Put another pin and make some kind of additional blur zone, if necessary. For example, I will have a palm trees, less blurry now. But this section is more blurry. Let's do this, for example. Here it turns out such a peculiar effect, as if we took photo with a fogged lens. Let's click OK. I hope you enjoyed these filters. And as a homework assignment, you need to blur 3 images. Image of the sea with the field blur, the iris blur on this dish here, and the tilt shift filter. We continue to get acquainted with the amazing features of the blur gallery. Let's get started. We'll try to make this photo more artistic and dynamic. First, create a copy of the layer, then apply to it a convert for a smart filter option. I'm not going to explain why. You all probably already know it by heart. And now we will apply a filter from the blur gallery, which is called Puff Blur. This is a very interesting filter. I'm removing this check mark. I will tell you about it later. Look, as soon as we open the filter, a certain path is created. The blur occurs along it. We can change this path, change its location. And look, I move the path, and the blur changes. Well, just some kind of dizziness. The path can be different. I can click anywhere and, for example, do this, but I would like my blur to follow the path of the girl to emphasize the effect of her movement. So, I'm going to edit a few more points now. So, let's put this point here. Here we'll put another one, and you can tick Edit Blur Shapes. And then we can also move the sliders, like this, and edit some more blurring. That is, we have to make sure that we do it the way we would like. So, the speed allows us to increase the degree of blur. Let's move it like this. This is how we can create multiple paths. For example, here I can create another path. Let's make it like this. Okay, so here we'll edit another point and bend the space. In this way, let's edit speed. By the way, the taper allows us to make the blur a little different. Take a look at the place which is the center of the blur. The blur here becomes smaller. And if you are interested in this option, of course, you can edit it. It is also possible, for example, to change the intensity for the strobe strength. Look, copies are made, and just for the effect of movement, it can be very good. Well, for example, this is how I will leave it. Here we can do another thing. Adjust the strobe flashes. Look, that's what we got without them. And here is what we have now. I can leave the effect that suits me most. Here you can choose different types of presets. For example, the rare sync flash creates this effect. I think it can also be very interesting, and in some cases it may even be preferable to choose this option. Maybe even in this case it will be good. And you can also choose a basic blur, but it will be like this. I still probably choose the rare sync flash. Well, maybe I'll just edit a little more blurring here, because it seems to me that it will be maybe a little more spectacular. Well, it's very difficult to predict what we'll get in the end. Well, let's hope that we'll get something interesting. So, But of course, we can always go back with the help of a smart filter and edit what we got again. Let me make a strong enough effect so that the effect of our filter is clearly visible. By the way, if you want to remove some path, let me draw another one. If I want to remove it, I can select it, press the backspace, and the path will be removed. This is just in case if you create some unnecessary path. Now let's click OK and let's see what we got. And the result is like this. Let's move on to the Smart Filter mask. Let's take a black brush and emphasize the figure of a girl. This is how you can change the degree of opacity in order to make the figure more expressive or less expressive. Well, something like that, for example, we can do. So, a hand right here. And now, to add even more dynamics to the image, let's get ahead of ourselves a little and use another filter, which we'll talk about a little later. We'll create flares. To do this, go to the filter and select the lens flare. And there are different flares here. And our task now is just to place the flare. Look, you see, we can change its location and place it where it seems most appropriate to us. We can also change the degree of brightness, if necessary. And we can change the lens type. I set the simplest one that goes by default. Click OK and see how interesting it is. And now, in order to add the brightness to the image, I'll make a composite layer and apply a blending mode to it. So the layer is ready. And let's pick up some mode. So, what we might have here? Well, as you can see, there are a lot of options. I probably won't even sort everything out. Okay, well, perhaps we choose and reduce the opacity. And look how we turned a simple image to an interesting composition. Let's recall the original photo. I press Alt and click on the eye icon of the layer. That's what we had. And that's what we got. Well done! It would probably be possible to move it up a little bit, to the left, and maybe make it a little smaller. Moving on. And now we'll look at another interesting filter. As usual, I applied the convert for smart filters. And now I go to the blur gallery and select the spin blur. And here everything is very simple. Blurring occurs around the circle. You can put this circle in the right place. For example, I put it on a wheel in order to create the illusion of a moving car, and then simply reduce it to the desired size. How here we can move these dots like this? Look what is going on. We can set the parameters we need, the blur angle, so as to create the complete illusion that the wheel is spinning. We can also use the strobe strength to create additional motion effect. Look, I added a little, and that's what we get when we added the strobe strength. You can also work a little here, and the effect will also be a little different. Let's stop at this value and click OK. But to create a full-fledged effect of movement, of course, one spinning wheel is not enough. So I'm going to create another copy of the layer now. I put it on the very top, and I will apply another filter to this layer. This is a very old filter. It has existed for a long time. I don't even know since when. It has been in the blur group since very distant times. It is called motion blur, and obviously it creates the effect of movement. Here you can choose the angle of shift of your movement, and that's how it will look like. Well, I will choose the horizontal option. Here you can choose the distance that suits you. Well, look at what options there may be. Everything is quite simple here. Well, it's just too simple. So we press OK. After that, we apply a mask on which we can remove what we need to remove with a black brush. Maybe the brush doesn't even have to be completely transparent. And look at what we're getting. So, probably you can even restore it here. I take a white brush and restore it. Here is such an option. And that's how a completely stationary car starts moving at a very high speed. Let's remember what we did today. We create such an interesting effect using a filter from the blur gallery, which is called path blur. And we run a little ahead and use the block from the rendering group. This will be the first homework assignment. And the second homework will be to create a motion effect for this car using a filter from the blur gallery, which is called a spin blur, and also with the help of a filter from the blur group, which is called motion blur. You may want to edit some more effects to these images, because you already know a lot. I will only be glad to see your creative ideas. And that's it for today. It was Peter Romanov and AIM School. See you next time.